everybody! So in today's video I am going to be sewing through McCalls M7719, specifically this off-the-shoulder top with the straight skirt. A little bit different than my vintage reproduction patterns that I've normally been doing, but I saw it and I thought it was cute and I wanted to give it a try. So if you are interested in seeing how I made this dress, then go ahead and keep on watching. So one of the big themes of this pattern is that you can take different pieces and match them together. And I wanted to show you that this pattern actually comes with a little paper doll, and it gives you instructions on how to trace this out so you can put it on the girl, and you can match up the tops and the bottoms, and you can color it in and see how it looks. And I actually really like that. I think that's really cute. So something about this pattern that is mildly annoying is it doesn't tell you what you need in terms of interfacing, lining, and notions until you buy the pattern and look inside on the instruction sheet, which is a little frustrating because when I'm making a full-on proper project, I like to buy all of my fabric and all of my notions and all of my lining. I like to buy everything I need all at once, usually with the pattern. So the fact that you have to buy the pattern, go home, open it, look at it, to then find out exactly what you need is a little frustrating, but I kind of get it. There's a lot of options and not a lot of room on the envelope, but that's just something to be aware of. So I am making the off-the-shoulder top with the straight skirt. I think that's how they list it. So for the parts that are the actual off-the-shoulder bit, those kind of create their own facing. You're supposed to cut out a lot of kind of replicates of that to be able to kind of face it with itself. And then they do the same thing with the midriff back. Do they do that with the midriff front? Yeah, and then they do it with the midriff pieces. They kind of face themselves, and you are supposed to line the bodice pieces. I'm not going to cut out any lining or interfacing today because this is just kind of a mock-up to see how it will look. I don't need to worry about it being, not see-through or structurally sound. I just want to get a general idea of how the pattern works and how it goes together. I can tell you right now, this skirt is going to look a little short for me, but we'll see. We'll see. I'm also noticing there's not really a place to cut and add length, so I'm not going to do that because there's no dedicated place to do that. The pattern instructions tell me that I will need for this combination a total of 3 yards of fabric. I am going to do my best to try to make that happen. Alright, so here's how I kind of had everything laid out. I had the skirt front piece and all of my pieces that I had to go in the fold over here, and then I started laying out all the rest of the bodice, and the further along I got, I realized that I would not be able to quite make the 3-yard mark if I did everything just kind of the way I normally would, and I would also have a ridiculous amount of fabric wastage all along the entire top of this, and I don't really want to waste my muslin. I'm okay with using more if I need to, lengthwise, but I don't really want to do that if there's going to be this much left over. So the instructions have this little diagram where you kind of fold it a little bit further down to fold it over to just where you need to do all the folded pieces, and then you just kind of flip and do some double-sided on the top. I'll show you when we get there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut out the 2 skirt pieces, and then I am going to kind of basically lay out everything the way that they tell me to in the diagram, and then cut that bit of muslin, and then fold that back up onto itself to do all of the cutting. And that will just, I'll still think I will hit the 3-yard mark. This would go just past it, probably the 3 1/4, maybe a little bit further than that mark. But I don't like the idea of wasting all of this when I could not. So this time I will follow all of the directions. And here are the 2 skirt pieces laid out. So this pin cushion is right at the 1.5-yard mark, and the edge of that instruction sheet, this edge right here, that's at the 1 5/8 yard mark. So you don't really need that extra 1/8 of a yard if you trust whoever's cutting to cut straight, and if you trust both sides to be straight in your pinning ability. Anyway, I'm gonna get that cut out and then lay out the bodice pieces. Okay, so here's the piece that I'm cutting the bodice out of. I cut a 1 3/8 of a yard long piece of fabric. That should be just about right. I could probably squeeze a little less, but that's honestly close enough. So these 3 pieces right here, I'm going to have to cut out again, which I'm pretty confident that I can squeeze in again. I'm going to get all of these folded pieces cut, and then once I do that, I'm actually going to fold this kind of back this way because otherwise I'd have to cut out this piece 4 separate times and this one twice, so that'll just give me a little bit less cutting to do. So that's what I'm going to do. Alright, so 3 yards did wind up being just about the perfect amount of fabric after I did all the folding and all that stuff. But real quick, I did want to point out that this is one of those patterns. I haven't worked with any modern McCalls patterns in a while, so I don't know if they're all like this. But the different sizes have different like patterns in the lines, so that kind of helps you keep everything straight, which I appreciate to an extent. However, I'm cutting this out on a size 20, and occasionally there are little bits you might be able to see here where the actual corner where you need to cut is in the gap of the dashes, so you kind of have to guess where it is. This one's kind of easy because you just kind of round it out, but there are others where you get like just the slightest little notch on there, and that kind of is telling you where to cut. Anyway, so just be careful if you're cutting it out, especially on size 20. I didn't really notice that being too much of a problem on the other sizes, but things to be aware of. Alright, so here we have steps 1 and 2 of the off-shoulder bodice. It was pretty self-explanatory, so I just sewed up these front darts, pressed them, sewed the side seams, pressed those open. So now we're going to basically do the same thing with the midriff pieces. I'm skipping the interfacing because I'm not doing that. So it'll look something like this. So here, this is just the midriff section sewn together at these 2 side seams right here. I also went ahead, and while I was there, I did this second piece that will eventually kind of become its lining. So now we are going to move on to the next step, which is to attach this to this bodice piece, matching everything up, right sides together, and just sew straight across. Okay, so the next step is to basically assemble the lining exactly the same way that you just did the bodice. I didn't cut out a lining piece, so I'm going to go ahead and do that real quick, but something that I think is a little odd, and I'm not entirely sure why they had you do this, is they're having you kind of face the midriff with the actual fabric instead of with the lining. And I don't really see that being too much of an issue unless you are using a main fabric that is something that might be really itchy or really kind of irritating to your skin. So if it's like a rough tulle, if you're using something covered in that rough tulle, if you're using like sequins or anything that is really going to be itchy kind of against your skin, don't cut out the facing the midriff twice from your main fabric. Just cut it out once and do the second set with your lining fabric, and just keep that in mind. So I'm just going to cut this out real quick and then assemble the lining exactly the same way as the bodice. So I lied a little bit. I hope you can find it in your hearts to forgive me. But on this midriff section, before we attach it, or before it wants you to attach it to the bodice for the lining, it wants you to sew a line of stay stitching, 5/8 of an inch, I think it's 5/8 of an inch, away from the bottom, and then it wants you to turn this edge upward and press it. And also clip into it because it's, you know, round in order to make round things clip. So if you're not familiar with clipping curves and kind of where to do that, I did it just about every 2 inches or so, and that seemed to work. But if you want to be a little bit more strategic with it, then if you wanted to kind of press this whole thing up on that seam line, and then anywhere that kind of forms like a little ripple or where the fabric kind of naturally wants to fold, that's going to be a good place to clip into the seam. So now I'm just gonna attach this now exactly like it's supposed to, and then come back. So I'm an idiot and folded over the wrong side. Although in my defense, because I was sitting here wondering what rip in the space-time continuum that I just ripped open because everything seemed to match up, but apparently it didn't. So, okay, in my defense, I'll show you on the one that I didn't cut up. Here are the center markings of where you're supposed to match things up. So here are the waist seam single triangles and the bodice center seam single triangles. They're not that far apart from each other, and they're both single triangles. So whoever came up with that idea needs to be fired, because that's incredibly easy to confuse. And now I am incredibly frustrated because I have to undo and redo everything that I just did because someone couldn't, you know, have the forethought of, let's put some double triangles somewhere to make some other distinction other than the like grand total of 1 inch difference between the two. All right, so here's the pattern piece in question. Now let me get all this lined up real quick just to show you how irritating this is. So here is the triangle mark that I guess you match up to the skirt later on the bottom of the waistline. So that's about right at the 2-inch mark. And then over here at the 1.5-inch mark is the triangle for the bodice. And that's awfully close together. That's a 1/2 inch on each side. So you're telling me in all of the quality control and all the pattern testing that it never came up that these marks are the same mark and they're that close to each other? Sorry, I'm big mad about this. What's the MSRP of this? Hold on. $21.95. $21.95 is what they are asking you to pay, which don't ever pay full price for like big pattern company. Don't ever pay full price. But like if they're asking you to pay $21.95 and there's a mess up like that, come on, McCalls, what are you doing? Anyway, now that I have everything properly sewn together, we're going to understitch the seam allowance. So basically I'm just going to feed this through my machine one more time and sew the seam allowance down to the midriff. Alright, so next we're going to start attaching the bodice to the lining, and we're going to do that right now only at these armholes. So match them up at right sides together with these rounded seams, and right now we are only going to sew at these rounded seams right here. Alright, so here's what that looks like when that's done. So the next step is going to be a little bit tricky and a little bit hard to maneuver, and that's to understitch the seam allowance to the bodice lining. Now here I have my lining, and the instructions have the diagram kind of going this way and telling you to do it this way. I don't like having my seam allowance on the bottom when I'm understitching. I find it's real easy to, you know, make things mess up under there and you don't catch it all the time. So I'm going to do it from this direction. And I have the word lining written somewhere on my lining so that I know which one is which. But anyway, I'm going to come at it from this direction so that the seam allowance is on the top. And I'm just going to go very slowly and slowly understitch this seam allowance to the lining. And I guess I will go ahead and show you how I'm doing this because understitching curves like this can be a little bit tricky. So what I'm going to do is put this. The lining is underneath, and I'm going to spread these apart. I did go ahead and backstitch at this seam when I was sewing it, so I'm going to spread these apart as far as I can. Get this under my needle, lower my presser foot, and now I'm going to kind of spread this out a little bit as I work with it. And the important thing here is you want to keep kind of your tension here, and this is what's going to stop like a piece of fabric from sliding underneath and getting caught and you have to redo it all. So keep a little tension pulling outward, and then I like to go slowly and use my index finger, either my index finger or my thumb, to keep the seam allowance down and where it's supposed to be. So I'm going to do a couple of stitches, rethread my needle because this stupid machine, if you don't have like a 6-inch tail, will eat the stupid thread. Like my other one was a royal pain, but this one is just annoying. Okay, so now that you have a sufficiently, 18-inch long string that won't get eaten up by your machine, we're gonna do this for real. Can you tell I'm real salty today? I'm real salty today. It's that one pattern piece. That pattern piece got me so salty. Anyway, so now I'm going to do a couple of stitches. And because there's a curve here, I'm really gonna make sure that I'm pulling this side and I'm rotating this side as I pull it through, and that's going to help make sure that everything is nice and taut and I'm not going to have to worry about accidentally sewing through a piece of fabric that I don't want to. So you'll see I have that little bit of extra rotation going in this hand, and I'm again still going slowly to make sure I don't pull anything through that I don't want to. Through. And if you accidentally sew through something and you can tell that you're sewing through it, just fix it as fast as you can and keep going, because that way when you go back and you unpick it, all of those correct stitches are going to kind of want to hold it in place, so that you only have to worry about that little bit that you have to unpick and redo, and you don't have to like stop and then start over and then maybe do the same thing a couple inches down. And there we have it. a neatly understitched lining. So here is what that looks like, all nice and pressed. Here it is from the outside. Here's the lining. In retrospect, I definitely should have clipped into the seam before I did the understitching, but it's not the end of the world. Like, it's still, you know, pressed nicely once I did it afterwards. Just would have been better to do it before, and in that case you definitely want to make sure that you're understitching with the seam allowance on top where you can see it. Anyway, next step is to baste these top edges together. So we're going to go all the way across on the top, and then this kind of side piece, we're going to start from, come back here. We're going to start from the armhole, and then we're going to go across, but we're going to stop with about 3 inches left to go. So now we're going to move on to assembling the collar. So here we have the front piece, and then we have the back pieces, and we are going to attach these at these side seams. I'm skipping the interfacing, so I'm going to do exactly the same thing on the main collar and also on the collar facing. So once those pieces are sewn together, now we have to reinforce at these large circles. There's 4 of them on each piece. So what I'm going to do is right on the 5/8 of an inch line, I'm just going to sew directly across these for about 1 inch. All right, so here's kind of what that looks like when you get everything sewn. So now we are going to clip on both pieces. We're just going to clip in to the circle. We're not going to go past the stitching. Careful not to clip the stitching. And then on the facing side, which is the one, if you applied interfacing, it's the one with the interfacing on it. Only on that one are we going to iron this. We're going to iron this edge piece up. We're going to leave this corner piece down. Then we're going to iron this center piece up and kind of under itself. Again, leave the corner as it is, and then iron this edge up. All right, so everything is nice and pressed and clipped and all of that good stuff. So I'm actually going to deviate from the directions a little bit, because the directions have you attach these pieces to each other, right sides together, and they have you sew up both this entire seam up here, the not clipped one, and these clipped, or these rounded edges that we did not fold up. So they have you sew all of that and all of this and then try to understitch it. But you're basically making a tube, and then you're trying to understitch into a tube, which just isn't gonna work. They say just do it as far as possible. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew this entire kind of long unfolded seam first. I'm going to understitch that, and then once I'm finished with that, then I'm going to sew this seam and try to understitch it as much as I can. Because there's only so much that you can understitch when you're working with a tube. There's only so much you can force under the machine at once. So I think I will have better luck getting a better finish on this top edge if I do that separately, or if I do that before I try to do these smaller sections. All right, so understitching these corner pieces is a bit of a pain. So the way that I kind of found that you kind of have to do it is you have to go in and you kind of have to do it from this side, from the top side. So I'm pressing, or I'm doing my best to keep the seam allowance pressed that way, and I have to come in from here with the needle here and sew down. Here's the first side I did. It, as you can see, is not great. I didn't do a very good job, and it crossed over, which is definitely not what you want to do when you're understitching. But I don't know how much I care about this not being perfect, so I'm just going to do my best to do it again on this side, but I found that it was easier to come at it from the side with the seam allowance underneath, and I was able to get all of this all the way through, but I did have to fiddle with it a lot. So I have my seam allowance going that way, and I'm just gonna start here. I'm gonna do this a little bit further over, and maybe that'll help me not mess this up. So I'm just gonna pull this seam taut, make sure the seam allowance is still going the correct way, and just a couple of stitches at a time go through and adjust, go through and adjust and adjust. And I'm going to keep doing that all the way down and hope that this one turns out better than the other side did. Alright, so this definitely turned out better on this side than it did on the other little corner. So now what I think I have to do is turn this right side out and press it. So here is what that looks like, all nice and pressed, and I'm just going to go ahead and say definitely do it the way I did it, where I sewed and understitched this long top portion first, or this long kind of unbroken portion first, before you try to do this curved piece, because I can't imagine having to like fiddle with the machine and get this entire length through. So yeah, it was definitely much easier to sew and understitch this seam first before you try to sew and understitch this seam. Alright, so the next step is to attach this collar piece to the bodice. So we're going to right sides together, match up this front section, and this is going to get stitched on all the way across. Make sure you don't catch this folded edge, so just get that out of the way, stitch across here, and then for these kind of back pieces, we are going to do essentially the same thing, but they tell you to stop 3 inches away from the edge. And I looked ahead, and that has to do with how they want you to install the zipper, which if you haven't been following the series, I'm not going to be installing the zipper the way they want me to. And the reason for that is throughout this course of making many mock-ups, I'm going to be recycling my zippers so I don't have to buy, 17 of them. So I'm going to just quickly baste my zipper in at the end where it should be, and that's going to save myself a little bit of trouble when I eventually need to rip that zipper out and recycle it to use in a different project. So I will be, ideally you would, stop sewing there and then install the zipper, but I'm going to stitch properly until there, and then I'm just going to baste this edge shut all the way to the end. And again, that's just to make it easier for me to baste in the zipper real quick. Alright, so here's how it looks like once it is finished. Ignore these marks. This is, I guess, where the bust line is and where the waistline is. Anyway, so now I'm going to press the seam allowance up into here so that when this gets folded over and stitched down, the seam allowance is nice and hidden away. The instructions tell you to slip stitch this so you can do it by hand, and if you were doing it by hand, ideally you would only catch this lining to the seam allowance, and then that way you're not going to see any stitches on the outside. I'm just going to baste it because this is a mock-up and I'm not too concerned with visible top stitching, so I'm just going to baste this shut. And again, I think the instructions really only want you to sew this part up for a little bit, and they want you to leave a little bit open. I'm just going to baste that all the way shut, again, for ease of zipper placement. Alright, so now we're going to move on to the skirt. Now the skirt is pretty self-explanatory. There's nothing really complicated about the skirt. Basically, we're going to sew up all of the darts. We're going to press the darts towards the center. Then we are going to sew the side pieces or the back pieces to the front at the sides. And if you're doing the lining, you're going to do exactly the same thing with the lining. So I'm just going to go do that real quick. Also, a quick note, I read through the directions and I actually read through them like word by word this time, and unless I missed something, the instructions never tell you when to actually sew up that back seam of the skirt. So I'm just going to sew up to this notch here. That's usually a good indicator that that's where the zipper kind of is supposed to go to. So I'm just gonna sew all the way up to here. So here I have the skirt pretty much done. There wasn't anything too complicated to do, so I did all my darts, I did all my seams, I pressed everything. I also went ahead and did the hem, just because it'll be easier. It won't necessarily be even, but it'll be easier. And the pattern calls for a 1 1/4 inch hem. Alright, so now we're going to attach the lining, or the skirt, to the bodice. So with right sides together, right side down, we are going to attach the bodice to the skirt. So we're going to make sure that this lining edge that we folded over, we're going to make sure that gets pulled out of the way. And we're only going to attach these skirts. And if you sewed on the lining, what the instructions want you to do is to sew everything properly the way you normally would, except when you get 3 inches away from this end, stop sewing, kind of back tack, then move the skirt lining out of the way, and then keep sewing the main body of the skirt onto the bodice. And again, that has to do with putting in the zipper later and making sure the zipper is nice and finished. So I know that's kind of complicated and difficult for me to show you if I don't have a lining of the skirt, but just, you know, if there was an imaginary lining here, I would sew, stop, peel that back, pick up my needle, move my needle, and then sew the skirt onto the bodice the way that it should be. I'm going to sew all of this all the way across, again, because I don't really care about how they're installing the zipper. And then from there, they want you to, I believe, again, slip stitch this nice folded finished edge over the seam allowance. I'm, again, just going to baste it because I don't really care about visible top stitching at this point. And then from there, I'm going to baste in the zipper, and I think we're done. Alright, so I have this kind of tentatively pinned together to kind of figure out where I needed to put the zipper. So I think if I take the zipper in by like a little bit, I think it'll fit a little bit better. This part up here does want to kind of flop out. We'll see if that still does that when I have the zipper holding all of it all the way up. As far as the fit goes, other than being just slightly too big, I think it fits pretty well. The skirt is a little shorter than what I usually go for, but I'm not too mad at it. But let me get the zipper basted in, and then I guess I will go over all my final thoughts. Alright, so I got my hair up, I got my Spanx on, I got my heels on to try to like simulate how my body would look if I were to make this dress and wear it at like a nice formal event, which is I think what this is kind of made for. So I'm just going to look in the mirror and like ramble off my thoughts. So the first one that I'm noticing is this dress keeps riding up on my hips. Now for a lot of kind of tighter fit skirts, that happens a lot. So I'm not necessarily faulting the pattern for that, but it is something to be aware of that, you know, you're gonna have to be constantly fiddling with it. The other thing is this off the shoulder bit is honestly kind of annoying. Like it doesn't fit well, and even if I put in interfacing here and allowed it to like stick up straight, I don't think it would look particularly good. I don't think it's very flattering. I would much prefer it to lay kind of flat against my chest. And I think this is again another case of something being patterned for smaller sizes that didn't size up particularly well. They didn't really make a whole lot of adjustments for the larger sizes. Because I think with a thinner person with a smaller or like a flatter chest, I think this would fit well, and I think if this kind of proportionately got shrunk down, it would fit someone like that very well. But because I am a larger size and I am a little more blessed in the boobage area, it sticks out kind of weird, which I'm not super happy with. But the problem is I don't really know how to fix that, because my first thought would be, you know, let's put some darts in here and make it lay flatter. But if I do that, then I will lose even more ability to move my arms, which when you choose an off-the-shoulder dress like this, you pick the battle of not having full mobility of your arms. But I feel like if I take this in anymore, I'm going to lose even more mobility. Although, also this midriff section right here, there's no shaping whatsoever here. Like, it's made on kind of a curve and a slightly conical shape. And again, I think the idea here is that it should fit kind of close to your rib cage. And again, on smaller sized people, you know, smaller, thinner people tend to not have as much in the boobage area, you know, by ratio. Again, not always. I've known very skinny people with, you know, but what I'm trying to get at is that, yeah, I feel like if this was almost thinner and shorter, I'd be able to get this closer into my rib cage without my own boobs getting in the way of it. Because the way that this is patterned right now, it's really not as flattering as it could be, which is a little frustrating. This midriff part definitely wants to sit higher up than I want it to, but I don't really want to elongate it because it doesn't fit particularly well. So I might have to find a way to, if I were to make this again, elongate this bodice piece. Like, I get why this is patterned this way, because this pattern, like this midriff piece, is identical across all the different top combinations, and it's just this top part that changes. So I understand wanting something consistent that, you know, you can take with you for all the different parts, but I don't know. I feel like if this midriff piece was shaped a little bit more, I feel like it would be a lot more flattering if it was shaped. Let me try like pulling this down to where I think it's supposed to be. Get like the waistline on my actual waistline. Because that's the thing, my waistline is up here. So it kind of naturally wants to sit on my waistline, but it doesn't fit particularly well. Like, this was definitely not drafted, or this particular top was definitely not drafted with larger sizes in mind. See, the back's pretty cute. I did go ahead and kind of taper in the skirt a little bit around the zipper so that it wouldn't like stick out weird. Which I do really like the skirt. I like how the skirt fits. I like how the skirt looks. Again, a little shorter than what I go for, but I'm not mad at it. I don't know, I just feel like even if I took this part in at the back a little bit, it wouldn't necessarily look good. I was really rooting to like this one better than I actually do. I don't think I like this one particularly much. What if I like hoisted these up a little bit more? You see, now that just looks ridiculous because now my boobs are pulling this forward. Man, I was really hoping I would like this one. Alright, so final thoughts on M7719. I gotta admit, I'm a little disappointed. I was really hoping that this would fit better than it did, but like I kind of mentioned earlier, I think this is a case of a pattern being drafted for smaller sizes and not really translating well when you just kind of scale everything up to a larger size. I think if I really wanted to make any sort of alterations to this, I think what I would have to do is basically lengthen this bodice piece right here, because what I'm noticing for the midriff is when I'm standing up, doesn't really apply here, but when I'm standing up, the only parts of the midriff that really stick out and don't want to stay close to my body are these parts directly underneath this bust dart. Which is a little frustrating because then it doesn't want to lay nice against my body and it's not particularly flattering, and it's definitely not nearly as flattering as I would have hoped. So basically, in order to make this piece fit, I would have to add probably a good 2 to 3, maybe even 4 inches onto the bottom of it and completely redraft the dart, which is kind of a lot of work, and I'm not entirely sure if I want to do that, especially combined with all of the other strange fit issues with this dress. Like this off the shoulder piece is just, it's just strange. I don't entirely know what it wants to do, because I would kind of think that it's supposed to lie kind of flat against your chest. Otherwise, if it's sticking out here, if I'm sitting down and if anybody is standing next to me, they're going to be able to see directly down my dress, which is not the move. But again, at the same time, I hesitate to try to take this in and put some darts in here to try to make it lay flat, because then I will lose even more mobility for my arms. Although now that I'm thinking about it, my mobility in my arms is limited by like what's over here on this shoulder piece and not necessarily anything that's going on over here. So if I really wanted to, I probably could put some darts in here, but since there aren't really any other darts or pleats kind of prominently designed into the dress. There are a couple where you need them, but they're not really supposed to draw a lot of attention and be a design feature. I would feel weird putting all of that kind of shaping in here. Maybe if I could find a way to do the back and take the back in a little bit, maybe it would help the front. But again, just the way that the shoulder fits and how the shoulder seems to be kind of isolated from everything else makes me think that just taking it in at the back won't be enough to fix what's going on here. I will really say I love how the skirt fits. I love this skirt. I love exactly how it fits. It's a little bit shorter than what I would normally go for, but it's really easy to add length to a skirt. You just add it to the end. So easy. So even if the bodice doesn't fit me that well, the skirt is a 10 out of 10. Love the skirt. Perfect fit. After I did take in the back seam like 2 inches just to make everything fit nice. Because I'm in that weird in-between spot where I think if I make the size 18, it's going to be slightly too small for me. So I have to make the size 20, but the 20 is still a little bit too big to look nice. Dress sizes are weird. It's more, I think if I make this in an 18, I'm not going to be able to sit down in it. Like when I stand up, I think it'll fit really nice and look really nice, but it's going to be a case of not being able to really move or breathe or sit down or eat. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, and if you're interested in seeing any kind of behind the scenes and sneak peeks of upcoming projects, go ahead and give me a follow over on Instagram at Thread and Needlefish. That's where I post all kinds of things. Sometimes I post polls, and there probably will be some polls coming up because I have a very, very, very large, involved 10-part series that I'm planning on making that should be out for sometime in the month of March, probably somewhere in the middle couple of weeks. And in this series, I'm basically going to be breaking down the absolute bare minimum you need to know to start sewing. And the sample project that we are going to be working on is a pair of pajama pants, because I feel like that's a really good starting off point. So I will be breaking down bit by bit the absolute bare minimum you need to know to be able to sew yourself a pair of pajama pants. So those are going to be my next couple of videos, my next 10 or so videos. I also have a couple of plans because I need to sew some actual clothes. I've made a lot of mock-ups, and I think it's time to start making some actual clothes that I can actually wear out in public for when I go grocery shopping, because that's pretty much all I do to go out in public now is go grocery shopping, because we're still in the panoramic, the Presbyterian, provolone. We're still in the panty, so we don't really get to go out anymore. I also have plans to remake one of my Mock-Up Monday projects as an actual nice, professionally done, wearable garment, and I do think I might be filming that to kind of show you the difference of what I'm just trying to speed through to get a mock-up done and where I actually stop and take my time and work on the little details to create a real dress that I plan on wearing. And I have a very long laundry list of things I would like to accomplish in this year of 2021. A lot of more functional and versatile wearable pieces that I'd be able to actually wear and wear together. Because as much as I love my fun, wild print Hawaiian shirts, they don't tend to go well with my fun, wild, wacky print skirts and pants that I've made. So I need some more basics, so I do plan on working on those. So if any of that sounds interesting to you and you want to stick around through my upcoming year of moderately exciting projects, please give me a follow, like, subscribe, all that fun YouTube stuff. If you like this pattern, leave me a comment, leave me a like, all that fun stuff. Say, one of my goals for the end of this year is to reach 500 subscribers. I'm sitting around 125, I think, right now. So I think 500 is a doable number for the end of this year. And again, thank you so much for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!